birds. We had both of them rolling back. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Cactus 1549.
Which engine did you lose?
Both engines. This is the captain. Brace for impact.
Going down! He's going down! He's gonna hit the water!
This is Sully on the Hudson. It all begins in a moment of extreme tension. A flight captain sends an urgent distress signal to the control center as both engines of his plane have suddenly failed. Beside him, his co-pilot Jeff warns with concern that they are flying dangerously low. Meanwhile, the plane loses altitude rapidly and approaches the city buildings of New York dangerously. On board, passengers can barely contain their panic. They watch through the windows as the plane flies just meters from residential towers, even brushing one of them before descending. Suddenly, there is a strong impact, but it was only a memory because Sully wakes up with a start. It had all been a nightmare reported on the news, yet the whole world celebrates what they consider a miracle. U.S. Airways Flight 1549 successfully landed on the icy waters of the Hudson River, and all 155 passengers survived. The press has hailed him as a hero, but for Sully, the experience doesn't end there. Over and over, he relives the moment in his mind, haunted by every detail, unable to escape the memory. Together with Jeff, he is summoned by the National Transportation Safety Board for an official investigation. During the recording of the session, Charles, one of the board members, refers to the event as an accident, but Sully interrupts him without hesitation. It was not an accident. It was an emergency landing, a conscious decision made in a matter of seconds. He knew what he was doing and did not act blindly. However, the big question remains. Why did he decide to land on the Hudson instead of trying to return to the airport? Sully calmly replies that it was a matter of instinct backed by experience. There was no time for anything else. Some engineers insist one of the engines, the left one, still running at idle, but he firmly denies it. He claims both engines completely failed, and that feeling is etched clearly in his memory. Meanwhile, Sully's public image becomes divided. On one hand, the media portrays him as a modern-day hero. On the other hand, the board seems determined to question his decision. Still, many people admire him, colleagues and ordinary citizens who recognize him on the street. During a taxi ride, Sully talks on the phone with his wife, Lori. She lives with their 2 daughters and worries not only about the media pressure, also the uncertainty surrounding their future. When he arrives at the hotel, journalists swarm him, throwing questions as if he were a celebrity. This constant attention overwhelms, exhausts, and wears him down. That same night, he talks with Lori again. She expresses her anxiety, and he, vulnerable, admits his doubts for the first time. He fears he may have been wrong, fears the board might be right, and if that turns out to be true, he could lose everything, including his pension. The next day, during a television interview, Sully says he doesn't consider himself a hero, he just did his job. But soon after, his mind betrays him again. He imagines a new catastrophic scenario, seeing his plane crash in the heart of New York with guilt, pressure, and fear haunting him.
Sully!
Later, in another meeting with the board, they report that computer simulations indicate it might have been possible to return to the airport, and that perhaps the left engine was still running. Sully and Jeff flatly deny this. Both recall that both engines had completely failed and insist that at that moment no viable alternative existed. However, there is no conclusive proof. They cannot show it because one engine was lost in the river after the landing. The investigators argue that Sully not only endangered the passengers' lives, but also caused millions in losses for the company. That pressure weighs heavily on him as he returns to the hotel. Once again, in his room, he decides to call Lori. Together, they remember the day of the accident, January 15, 2009, which started as an ordinary day. Everything seemed normal. They performed the pre-flight check and took off without any issues. However, fate completely changed. A flock of birds violently collided with the plane, causing both engines to fail fail immediately. Sully checked the instruments, confirmed the total loss of thrust, and tried to contact the control center for an open runway. Soon, he realized they wouldn't reach any airport in time. It was then that he made the toughest decision of his career, to land on the Hudson River. He ordered the crew to prepare for impact while the flight attendants instructed the passengers. Sully, on his part, informed the control center that they would not be landing on solid ground. Within seconds, the plane disappeared from the radar. In the present, Sully ends the call feeling overwhelmed. He steps outside and runs until he stops in front of an aircraft carrier where an old display plane is stationed. Looking at it, his mind drifts back to another moment in his life. He clearly remembers the day he piloted a jet that caught fire mid-flight and how, thanks to his skills, he managed to land it safely. That intact plane is the same one. Later, he enters a bar seeking some calm. The bartender recognizes him immediately and, in a spontaneous gesture, toasts to him, with other customers joining in. Meanwhile, the local television continues to show images of the incident, highlighting how the landing was a success and there were no casualties. Although water began to seep into the fuselage, he ordered an immediate evacuation. The doors opened, rafts were inflated, and shivering passengers started to get out. A ferry came to assist, and shortly after, another boat, the Wattway, arrived from the opposite side. A police helicopter also participated in rescuing those who had fallen into the water. Once the last passenger was evacuated, Sully did what he always does, stay until the end, and was the last to leave the plane. Once on shore, he called Lori to tell her he was safe. She hadn't yet learned what had happened until he asked her to turn on the TV. On the dock, still confused and soaking wet, Sul asked how many people had survived. He knew there should be 155, including the entire crew. At that moment, no one could confirm it. It wasn't until his supervisor arrived at the hospital where he was being examined that he received the news he most needed to hear. Everyone had survived. Later, during a television interview, a woman who witnessed the events stated with conviction that everything on that day seemed to align as if destiny had willed it. That reflection struck Sully deeply and gave him an idea he considered crucial for his defense. He decided to contact Larry, a member of the National Transportation Safety Board, and ask for a special favor. He wanted to repeat the accident simulation, but this time with human pilots in control instead of just computer simulations. Sully was convinced that if the results were based on human experience and instinct, the verdict would be completely different. Larry, willing to help, agreed to do everything possible to facilitate the test just before the official hearing began. Shortly after, with renewed determination, Sully entered the courtroom and took his seat. Charles, one of the investigators, started the session just as Sully had requested. The process began with an initial simulation under the same weather, altitude, and speed conditions as the fateful morning of the accident. In this first trial, the pilots directed the plane straight toward a runway. Immediately after the impact with a flock of birds, they managed a safe landing without incident. The experiment was then repeated, this time targeting another airport. And again, the result was a successful landing, seemingly without major difficulty. Sully, visibly frustrated by what he considered a lack of understanding, intervened to clarify that they were ignoring the crucial factor, the human factor. He explained that the situation was not just an exercise, but a real life-or-death scenario in which he and his co-pilot Jeff faced unbearable pressure in an unprecedented context. He recalled that no one warned them that both engines would fail at such a low altitude, something never recorded in the history of commercial aviation. Furthermore, Sully argued that the pilots performing the simulations already knew all the detail and knew what to expect. They were instructed to head straight to the airports with no time to analyze or make real decisions. To illustrate the lack of realism in the tests, he asked how many times they had practiced those simulated landings. He discovered that the pilot who managed to land at the second airport needed no fewer than 17 attempts to succeed. With this evidence in hand, Charles agreed to adjust the simulation to include include a more realistic decision-making window, 35 seconds, to better reflect the tension and urgency Sully and Jeff experienced. When the test was repeated under these conditions, both scenarios ended in failure, proving that reality could not simply be replicated with software. With a clearer picture, Jeff suggested that the audience listen to the original cockpit recording from the incident for the first time to understand firsthand what really happened in those critical minutes. After hearing the recording, Sully and Jeff withdrew to speak privately. For the first time, Sully was able to express what he felt inside, a deep pride in the work done and the conviction they had done everything possible to save the 155 people on board. When they returned, the hearing continued, and Elizabeth, key investigator, reported that the plane's left engine had finally been recovered. It was completely destroyed. This confirmed what Sully had maintained from the start and debunked the theory that the engine could have been functioning after the impact. This evidence, along with the updated simulation results and the recording, was enough to prove the truth. Sully and Jeff made the only viable decision in an extreme situation. After consulting with experts, Elizabeth concluded that the accident would have ended in disaster if Sully had not been in command, saving countless lives. However, Sully refused to take all the credit and emphasized the importance of teamwork, the quick thinking and professionalism of Jeff, the flawless work of the flight attendants, and the effective response of the rescue teams, all of whom ensured the evacuation and immediate care of every passenger. In fact, the entire rescue operation was completed in just 24 minutes, a record time considering the circumstances and the extreme cold of the river. And so, this feat was not only the victory of a pilot, but the collective triumph of a human team facing an unprecedented crisis. I hope you enjoyed this moving story, and you can find more stories like this on the channel. I upload videos every week about movies like this, so see you in the next one.